My husband brought his mistress to our Christmas dinner, told me to behave, to smile, to play nice while she sat at my table, in my home, eating my food. So I smiled. Oh, honey, I smiled real good. What happened next? Let me tell you how a queen handles disrespect. Before we get into this story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You're going to want to follow what happens next. Trust me, this is one Christmas dinner nobody will ever forget. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Diana, and 12 years ago, I married the man I thought was my soulmate. Lawrence was ambitious, charming, and had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. We built a life together, a beautiful life. He started a tech company that grew beyond our wildest dreams, and I climbed the ranks at one of the top law firms in Connecticut. We had two beautiful children, Brandon and Courtney, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect power couple, Black excellence personified, the kind of success story people wrote articles about. Our home was something out of a magazine. Christmas was always my favorite time of year, and I went all out. The tree touching the ceiling, lights strung across every window, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling every room. I'd spend weeks planning the perfect dinner, making sure every detail was just right. It was our tradition, our family time, sacred. But somewhere around June of last year, things started shifting. Lawrence was working later and later. His phone was always face down. Passwords were changed. He'd come home smelling different, acting different. You know that feeling in your gut when something's wrong? That's what I had. For months, I'd find receipts from restaurants I'd never been to, charges on the credit card for jewelry I'd never received. When I'd ask, he'd have an explanation ready. Always smooth, always believable, almost. I'm a lawyer. I know how to read people. I know when someone's lying. But I also had two children who believed their daddy hung the moon. And I had a career and a life I'd built. So I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress of his company going public was affecting him, that I needed to be patient and supportive. I pushed down that voice in my head that kept screaming the truth. December 20th, that's when my world split wide open. 5 days before Christmas, Lawrence came home early, which should have been my first clue. He sat me down in our living room, right in front of that beautiful Christmas tree we'd decorated as a family just weeks before, and he told me he'd been having an affair, 8 months, with Whitney, his 26-year-old assistant. He said he was in love with her, said it like he was telling me about the weather. But here's the thing that really got me. He wasn't asking for a divorce. No, that would have been too clean, too honest. He wanted to have both of us, wanted me to stay, to keep up appearances, to protect his image and his business. And then, while I was still trying to process the bomb he'd just dropped, he hit me with the real explosion. He wanted to invite Whitney to our Christmas dinner, our family Christmas dinner with his parents, his brother, our business associates. He wanted her at my table, and he expected me to be civil, to act like an adult, to smile and play hostess while his mistress sat in my home. I'll never forget how he said it. "You're a strong woman, Diana. You can handle this." Like my strength was something he could use against me. Like being strong meant I should accept disrespect with grace. Then came the threat. If I made a scene, if I embarrassed him, he'd file for divorce and make it ugly. He'd drag me through the mud and make sure I came out looking like the bitter, angry Black woman. He knew exactly what he was doing. That night, after he went to bed, like nothing had happened, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not the loud, dramatic kind of crying. The silent kind that shakes your whole body. The kind that comes from a place so deep you didn't even know it existed. Then I called my best friend Nicole. Then my sister Angela, and both of them said the same thing. Don't you dare let him do this to you. We met the next morning at Nicole's house. I was numb, moving through the world like I was underwater. But as we sat there drinking coffee and talking, something shifted inside me. Angela looked at me and said, "You know what you need to do, right? You need to play his game, but play it better." And just like that, The lawyer in me woke up. The strategist. The woman who'd never lost a case in court. I called my colleague, Kenneth, who specializes in divorce law. We met in his office, away from anyone who might talk. I told him everything. He took notes, his face getting harder with every detail. Then he said something that changed everything. Diana, before you do anything public, we need to know what you're dealing with financially. So we started digging. Bank accounts, investments, property records, everything. What we found made my blood run cold. Lawrence had been planning this for months. He'd moved money into hidden accounts. He'd put property in Whitney's name. There were emails between them, talking about how they'd paint me as unstable, how they'd make sure I got as little as possible in the divorce. They had a whole plan. While I was decorating the Christmas tree with our children, he was plotting how to destroy me. But here's what Lawrence forgot. I'm not just any woman. I'm a corporate attorney who's made a career out of protecting assets and finding loopholes. And I'm a Black woman who's had to be twice as smart and 3 times as prepared my entire life just to get a seat at the table. He wanted to play games. Baby, I invented the board. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Kenneth filed paperwork quietly. We documented everything. Every text message, every bank transfer, every lie. I hired a forensic accountant. I changed passwords and secured accounts he didn't even know I knew about. And then I planned the most beautiful Christmas dinner of my life. I went shopping for the finest ingredients. I set the table with our best china. I bought fresh flowers and made sure every corner of that house was perfect. I got my hair done, my nails done. I bought a new dress, deep emerald green, that fit like it was painted on. When I looked in the mirror on Christmas Day, I saw a woman who was absolutely stunning, powerful, in control. My children were at Nicole's house. I'd told them Mommy had a special grown-up dinner to handle, and they were going to have a fun sleepover with their cousins. They were excited, protected. That's all that mattered to me. The guests started arriving around 6. Lawrence's parents came first. Helen and Robert had always treated me like a daughter, and I hugged them like I always did. Then his brother Terrence and his wife Donna. They were good people, honest people. I wondered how they'd react to what was coming. The business partners arrived next, Frank and Harrison with their wives. These were men who'd invested millions in Lawrence's company. Men who valued reputation and integrity above almost everything. Then she walked in, Whitney, blonde, young, wearing a red dress that was just a little too tight, a little too short for a family dinner. Lawrence introduced her as a close friend who didn't have family to spend Christmas with. The room got quiet. You could feel the confusion. Helen's face did this thing where her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. But me? I walked right up to Whitney with the warmest smile you've ever seen. "Welcome to our home," I said, taking her hands in mine. "I'm so glad you could join us." I saw the relief flood Lawrence's face, saw Whitney relax. She actually thought I didn't know. Or maybe she thought I was so broken I'd just accept it. Either way, she smiled back at me like we were friends. I seated her right across from me at the table, close enough to see every expression on my face. Dinner started, and I was the perfect hostess. I made sure everyone's glasses were filled. I asked about people's families, their holiday plans. I complimented Whitney's dress, asked about her parents, where she grew up. She got comfortable, started talking more, laughing. Lawrence was relaxed now, probably thinking he'd gotten away with it, that he'd broken me and rebuilt me into something he could control. When the main course was served, I started talking about marriage, about commitment and trust, about how when you've been with someone for 12 years, you build something that can't be shaken easily. Whitney asked how Lawrence and I met, and I told the story, every romantic detail, our first date, our engagement, the wedding. I talked about the vows we made, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, forsaking all others. I said that last part, looking right at Lawrence. His jaw tightened. Then I stood up to make a toast. The room got quiet. I lifted my glass and looked around the table at all these people who'd been part of our lives. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, I said. Christmas is about family, about truth, about what really matters. It's about seeing people for who they really are. Lawrence's face was going pale. So I want to toast to honesty, to facing the truth, no matter how ugly it is, to consequences. I took a sip of my wine and smiled. That's when the projector turned on. See, I'd had it installed earlier that week. Told Lawrence it was for showing family photos after dinner. He'd thought it was sweet, but what appeared on that wall wasn't family photos. It was text messages, bank statements, photos of Lawrence and Whitney on vacation in Turks and Caicos while he'd told me he was at a business conference. Pictures of them at restaurants, at hotels, documents showing money transferred to accounts in Whitney's name, property deeds, and then the final piece, screenshots of their text messages planning how they'd force me out with nothing. The room exploded. Helen actually gasped out loud. Robert stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. What the hell is this, Lawrence? The business partners were frozen, their faces going from confused to horrified as they realized what they were seeing. Terrence was shaking his head, looking at his brother like he didn't recognize him. Whitney was crying, trying to get up from the table. Lawrence was stuttering, his smooth charm completely gone. But me? I was still smiling, calm as a summer morning. What you're seeing, I said, my voice steady and clear, is the truth. While my husband was telling me to be civil, to smile and play nice, he was stealing from our family. While he was bringing his mistress into our home and demanding I accept it, he was planning to destroy me in divorce court. While he was playing the role of loving husband and father, he was putting our assets in another woman's name. I pulled out a folder from the sideboard. These are divorce papers, I said, walking over and placing them in front of Lawrence. They include every piece of evidence of your fraud, your infidelity, and your attempt to hide marital assets. There's also a restraining order preventing you from accessing or moving any more money. I looked at Whitney, still smiling. And for you, sweetheart, there's a lawsuit for alienation of affection and fraud. Those properties Lawrence put in your name, they were bought with marital funds. I'm taking them back. Helen was crying now. Robert was yelling at Lawrence, calling him a disgrace. The business partners were already on their phones, probably calling their lawyers to figure out how to distance themselves from the scandal. Terrence just looked sad and disappointed. Whitney ran out of the house, still crying. Lawrence tried to grab my arm, begging me to wait, to talk about this, to be reasonable. That's when the security guards I'd hired came in. Yes, I'd hired security. 2 big professional men who'd been waiting in the side room. Please escort Mr. Lawrence and his guest off the property, I said calmly. Lawrence was crying now, actually crying, saying he was sorry, that he'd made a mistake, that we could fix this, but I just stood there, still wearing that smile. Because that smile wasn't about happiness, it was about power. It was about knowing I'd been 10 steps ahead the whole time. After they left, I sat back down at the table with the people who remained. Helen apologized to me through tears. Robert said he was ashamed of his son. The business partners told me they'd be calling an emergency board meeting. Lawrence's behavior had created a liability they couldn't ignore. My children were safe at Nicole's, and I'd protected everything we'd built. That was a year ago. The divorce went through quickly once all the evidence came out. The prenup Lawrence had made me sign was voided because of the fraud. I kept the house, majority of the assets, and full custody of Brandon and Courtney. Lawrence's business partners forced him out of his own company after the scandal. His reputation was destroyed, not by me, but by his own choices. Whitney disappeared from his life the moment things got hard. Turns out, she was only interested when there was money and prestige attached. As for me, I'm thriving. My career has never been better. I made partner at my firm. My children are happy and adjusted, and they have a mother who showed them that you don't accept disrespect, not from anyone. I found peace in myself, in my strength, in my ability to stand up, even when the whole world expects you to sit down. See, the thing about being a Black woman is that people always expect us to be quiet, to shrink ourselves, to take disrespect with a smile, and just be grateful for whatever scraps we're given. We're supposed to be strong, but not too strong, graceful, but not powerful. We're expected to hold everything together while being torn apart. But that night, I smiled on my terms. And that smile said everything without saying a word. It said, I'm smarter than you, I'm stronger than you, and I'm 10 steps ahead of you. So that's my story. That's how one Christmas dinner changed everything. If this resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more real stories about life, love, and learning to stand in your power. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to smile through something difficult and come out on top? Share your story. And remember, never let anyone mistake your grace for weakness. I'm Diana, and I'll see you in the next one. I stood there in my bra and slip, watching my mother-in-law hand my wedding dress to her, his mistress, the woman he'd been seeing behind my back. They thought I'd just cry and take it. But baby, they had no idea who they were messing with. Before we get into how I made them all pay, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because honey, this story is going to have you screaming at your screen. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a toxic mother-in-law, because you're going to want to stick around for this revenge. Now let me tell you how it all went down. My name is Naya, and 6 months ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. I'm a marketing director for a major firm in Atlanta, making good money, living my best life. Then I met Trevor at a networking event. He was fine, y'all. Tall, successful real estate agent, drove a nice car, said all the right things. He pursued me hard, and I'm not gonna lie, I fell fast. Within 3 months, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, he proposed at my favorite restaurant with a ring that had me crying happy tears. But looking back now, I should have seen the signs. I really should have paid attention when I first met his mama, Diane. This woman looked me up and down like I was something she scraped off her shoe. The first words out of her mouth weren't nice to meet you or welcome to the family. No, she said, oh, Trevor didn't mention you were so urban. Urban. That's the word she used, with this tight little smile that didn't reach her eyes. Trevor just laughed it off. Said his mom was old-fashioned, that she'd warm up to me. Spoiler alert, she didn't. Every time we visited, Diane had something to say. My natural hair was unprofessional. My job was too demanding for a wife. My family was loud. She'd make these comments with this sweet voice, like she was just concerned, you know? But I knew exactly what she was doing. My best friend Tasha warned me. She said, girl, that man is a mama's boy, and his mama is a racist. Run. But I didn't listen. I thought love would conquer all. I thought Trevor would choose me. I was so stupid. Wedding planning became my personal hell. Diane inserted herself into everything. She hated the venue I picked, said my bridesmaid dresses were tacky, told the florist to change my color scheme without asking me. And every single time I complained to Trevor, he'd say, baby, just let her have this. She's excited. She just wants to help. Help? The woman was trying to erase me from my own wedding. But the worst part, the absolute worst part, was when I showed her my wedding dress. I'd saved up and bought this custom-made gown, $8,000. It was stunning, elegant, with delicate lace, and a train that flowed like water. When I came out of the dressing room, I felt like a queen. Diane's face went sour immediately. She said it was too revealing, too flashy, too much for a respectable wedding. She actually suggested I wear something more modest, more appropriate for a church. I told her politely but firmly that this was my dress, my choice, and she could either support me or keep her opinions to herself. She smiled that fake smile again and said, of course, dear, whatever you think is best. I should have known right then that she was planning something. The week before the wedding, I was running around like a crazy person, handling last-minute details. My bachelorette party was on a Friday night, just a small thing with my girls at Tasha's house. We were having fun, drinking wine, laughing. But something felt off. I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. Around 10 o'clock, I told the girls I wasn't feeling well and headed home early. When I pulled into the driveway, Trevor's car was there, which was weird because he said he'd be at his bachelor party until late. But there was another car too, a white BMW I didn't recognize. I walked into my own house, my sanctuary, and heard voices upstairs, laughter, a woman's laughter. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought it would break through my chest. I walked up those stairs like I was in a dream, each step heavier than the last. I pushed open my bedroom door, and there they were, Trevor and some blonde woman, tangled up in my sheets, in my bed. The bed I'd picked out, the bed where I slept every night. Trevor jumped up, eyes wide, stuttering my name. The woman just laid there, looking annoyed that I'd interrupted. That's when I recognized her, Candace, Diane's friend's daughter. I'd met her twice at family dinners. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep, always laughing too loud at Trevor's jokes, always touching his arm. I thought I was being paranoid. Turns out, my gut was right all along. Trevor started with the excuses immediately. It's not what it looks like. This just happened. I've been so stressed about the wedding. I made a mistake. Blah, blah, blah. The same tired lines every cheater uses when they get caught. But Candace, she smiled. Actually smiled at me and said, "He told me you two were basically over anyway." I lost it. I screamed at them to get out. Threw his clothes out the window. Told him the wedding was off, and if he didn't leave in the next 5 minutes, I was calling the police. They left, but not before Candace gave me this look like she'd won some kind of prize. I spent that whole night crying, calling vendors, texting guests, canceling everything. My dream wedding, gone. My relationship, destroyed. My trust, shattered. The next morning, I was exhausted, emotionally drained, sitting in my living room in my pajamas, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I heard pounding on my door, aggressive, demanding pounding. I looked through the peephole and saw Diane standing there with Candace right beside her. I opened the door just a crack and asked what they wanted. Diane pushed past me like she owned the place, Candace trailing behind her with this smug expression. Diane said they were there to collect Trevor's things. I told her fine, take his stuff and go. But she didn't go to where Trevor's things were. She went straight to my bedroom closet, where my wedding dress was hanging. I followed her, confused, asking what she was doing. She pulled my dress off the hanger and I grabbed it, trying to pull it back. This woman, this horrible woman, yanked it so hard that the delicate lace started tearing. I let go because I didn't want to damage it more, and she bundled it up in her arms. Then she said the words that changed everything. "This dress cost too much money to go to waste. Candace will wear it when she marries Trevor properly. You were never good enough for my son anyway. At least Candace knows her place." I stood there frozen, watching her hand my $8,000 custom wedding dress to the woman who'd been sleeping with my fiancé. They walked out of my house with it, just took it. Like I was nothing. Like my feelings meant nothing. Like I didn't matter at all. I sank to the floor and cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. Not just because of the dress, but because of the disrespect, the audacity, the pure evil of it all. But after a few hours, something shifted in me. I was done crying. I dried my tears, washed my face, and called Tasha. When I told her what happened, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "Nia, you're one of the best marketing directors in Atlanta. You know how to build brands and destroy reputations. So why are you sitting there feeling sorry for yourself when you could be marketing their destruction?" That's when it clicked. I wasn't powerless. I had skills, resources, and most importantly, I had receipts. I spent the next week gathering everything. Text messages between Trevor and Candace, going back 4 months. Screenshots of him deleting money from our joint account. $25,000 he'd taken without asking. Emails where he'd lied to clients. I even had security camera footage from my Ring doorbell that caught Diane making racist comments when she thought I wasn't listening. I had pictures of the dress, proof of purchase, everything. I started building my case like I was launching a marketing campaign. Because that's exactly what this was. A campaign to destroy the people who destroyed me. First, I went after Trevor's business. Real estate agents live and die by their reputation. I reached out to his recent clients, very carefully, very professionally, and let them know about his character issues. I wrote honest reviews on public platforms about his dishonesty. Nothing defamatory, just facts. Within days, his business partner Kenneth called me. Turns out, Kenneth had no idea about any of this. And when he started digging, he found out Trevor had been faking sales numbers and keeping commissions that should have been split. Kenneth was furious. He dissolved their partnership immediately and provided me with documentation of Trevor's shady business practices. I submitted all of it to the Real Estate Licensing Board. Trevor's whole career started crumbling. Then I turned my attention to social media. I created a private account and started posting my story. I didn't show faces at first, just shared the texts, the timeline, the evidence. I showed the security footage of Diane taking my dress. I let people see exactly who these people were. My friends shared it. Their friends shared it. Within 48 hours, it had spread through our entire community. Diane's church group saw it. Her friends saw it. Everyone saw the real her, not the sweet church lady she pretended to be. The reactions were swift. Diane got kicked out of 3 different church committees. Her friends stopped inviting her to events. People who'd known her for decades wanted nothing to do with her. Trevor's family members started reaching out to me, apologizing, saying they'd always known Diane was toxic, but never had proof. Even Trevor's father called me, mortified by what his wife had done. The social exile was complete, but I wasn't done. I went legal. I filed a police report for theft of the dress. I sued Trevor for the $25,000 he'd taken, plus emotional distress. And here's the kicker: when I went through our financial records for the lawsuit, I discovered he'd forged my signature on a loan application. Fraud. I reported it to the authorities. And suddenly, Trevor wasn't just dealing with a civil suit. He was dealing with potential criminal charges. Candace's family got wind of everything too. Her father was a lawyer, a respected one, and when he saw what kind of man his daughter was involved with, he hit the roof. He threatened to sue Trevor himself if Candace didn't end the relationship. The wedding they were planning with my dress, canceled. Candace dumped Trevor faster than he could say, "I'm sorry." She wanted nothing to do with the mess his life had become. 3 months after they stole my dress, Trevor showed up at my door. He looked terrible, thinner, tired, desperate. He begged me to talk to him, said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, that he loved me, always loved me, that Candace meant nothing, that his mother had poisoned his mind. He cried actual tears and asked me to drop the lawsuits, to take down the social media posts, to give him another chance. I recorded every word. Told him I'd think about it. He left thinking, maybe, just maybe, I'd forgive him. 2 weeks later, Diane showed up. Same energy, different approach. She tried to apologize, but it was the fakest apology I'd ever heard. She said she was sorry for any misunderstanding, and that she'd acted out of concern for her son. She tried to manipulate me with tears, saying she was losing everything, that people had turned against her, that her life was ruined. She even offered to pay me back for the dress, though she claimed it was damaged now and couldn't be returned. I recorded her too, took detailed notes of everything she said. Then they both came together. That was the most pathetic thing I'd ever seen. Trevor and Diane, standing at my door begging me to have mercy. They offered to pay back every penny. They offered to write apologies. They offered to do whatever I wanted if I'd just make it all stop. They thought I was going to be the bigger person, that I'd forgive and forget. They thought I'd have mercy because that's what good Christian women do, right? Turn the other cheek. I looked at them both and said, "You want me to have mercy? Where was your mercy when you stole from me? When you humiliated me? When you treated me like I was less than human? You didn't just break my heart. You tried to break my spirit. You thought I'd just take it and cry and disappear quietly. But I'm not that woman. I'm not the one. I made them apologize on camera. Made them write detailed confessions of everything they'd done. They thought this was the path to my forgiveness. They thought I was giving them a way out. Instead, I submitted every recording, every confession, every piece of evidence to my lawyer and to the court. I won my lawsuit, all of it. Full repayment of the $25,000 plus $50,000 in damages for emotional distress. Trevor's real estate license got suspended pending investigation of the fraud charges. His reputation in Atlanta was destroyed. He had to take a retail job just to pay his bills. Diane lost her standing in the community permanently. Her friends never came back. Her church family wanted nothing to do with her. She became exactly what she'd tried to make me, an outcast. As for me, I got promoted at work. My boss said my handling of a crisis showed leadership qualities they valued. I went to therapy, worked through my trust issues, and started dating again. 6 months later, I met someone new, someone who respects me, who stands up for me, who would never let his family disrespect me. We're taking it slow, but it feels right. I rebuilt my confidence and my boundaries. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. I learned that some people don't deserve your mercy. Trevor still tries to reach out sometimes. Long texts about how sorry he is, how he's changed, how he wishes he could go back and do things differently. I don't respond. He's not my problem anymore. Diane sent me a Christmas card last year with a note saying she prays for me. I threw it away. They're both living with the consequences of their actions. And honestly, I sleep better at night knowing I stood up for myself. People ask me sometimes if I think I went too far, if maybe I should have just let it go and moved on. And I always tell them the same thing. They started a war they couldn't finish. They underestimated me because they thought I'd be too hurt, too broken, too concerned with being respectable to fight back. But I fought back with everything I had, and I don't regret a single second of it, not one. And that's how I made them beg for mercy. Some people think I went too far, but baby, they started this war, I just finished it. If you think I was justified, smash that like button. If you've got a revenge story of your own, drop it in the comments because I read every single one. Subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself and not letting anyone walk all over you. Remember, when they go low, you don't have to go high. Sometimes you gotta go smart. I'll see you in the next one. Stay blessed, stay strong, and never let anyone steal your crown or your wedding dress. They thought I was just the quiet wife who'd look the other way. My husband bought that woman a Rolls-Royce with my family's money. My mother-in-law threw champagne in my face, laughing. But see, they didn't know who I really was. And when I was done, they lost everything. If you've ever been underestimated, disrespected, or counted out, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now because you're about to hear how I took back everything they tried to steal from me. And trust me, you'll want to see this through to the end. Now, let me tell you how it all started. My name is Angela Morrison, and I built my first tech company from the ground up when I was 25 years old. Started in my tiny apartment with nothing but a laptop and a dream. By the time I was 32, I had created software that helped small businesses manage their inventory. And I was making good money, not billionaire money, but comfortable, real comfortable. The kind of money that lets you sleep at night without worrying about bills. But I never flaunted it. I drove a nice but modest car. I lived in a beautiful but not ostentatious home. I believed in staying humble, staying focused, staying grateful. That's where I was in my life when I met Trevor Whitmore at a charity gala. Lord, that man was fine. 6'3", perfect smile, sharp suit, and he had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room. He approached me during the silent auction, complimented my dress, and asked what I did for a living. When I told him about my company, his eyes lit up. He said he admired entrepreneurs, said his family had been in manufacturing for 3 generations, but they'd hit hard times. He made himself seem vulnerable, like he was a man trying to rebuild something precious his father had left him. We talked for hours that night. He was charming and attentive and asked me real questions about my work, my dreams, my life. After years of dating men who felt threatened by my success, Trevor seemed different. He seemed proud of me. We started dating, and for 6 months, it was like a fairy tale. He'd send flowers to my office, plan thoughtful dates, introduce me to his world. And then he introduced me to his mother. Diane Whitmore was everything I expected from old money. Cold handshake, tight smile, eyes that assessed you like you were applying for a job you weren't qualified for. The first time we met, she looked at my natural hair, looked at my outfit, and said something I'll never forget. She said, "How interesting. Trevor usually dates a different type." I knew exactly what she meant, but Trevor laughed it off, told me his mother just needed time to warm up to me. He promised me she'd come around. 6 months later, we got married. Small ceremony, elegant, just close friends and family. I paid for most of it because Trevor said the business was taking all his liquid cash. I didn't mind. I loved him, or at least I loved who I thought he was. What I didn't know was that I just signed up for the biggest con of my life. 3 months into our marriage, Trevor came to me with a proposal. He said Whitmore Industries needed a capital infusion to expand operations, to modernize equipment, to compete in the changing market. He showed me spreadsheets and projections that looked legitimate. He said if I invested $5 million, I'd become a silent partner, and we'd both benefit from the growth. He made it sound like our future, our family's legacy. So I wrote the check. $5 million from my company's profits, invested into his business. I became a partner on paper, but he handled all the operations. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. For the first year, everything seemed fine. We lived well. We traveled. Trevor seemed happy. But then things started changing. He'd come home later and later, always with excuses about meetings and client dinners. I'd see text messages flash across his phone, messages he'd quickly hide. Credit card statements showed charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in cities he claimed were business trips. When I asked questions, he had answers for everything. Smooth answers that made me feel crazy for asking. Then Diane started visiting more often. She'd come over unannounced, whisper with Trevor in his study, and they'd get quiet when I walked in. She started making more comments, too, about my clothes, my hair, how I ran my household, how I clearly didn't understand the demands of a man like Trevor. She said it with a smile, like she was helping me, but every word was a knife, and Trevor never defended me. He'd just say, "Mom, be nice," like it was all a joke. That's when I first saw Brittany Cole. Trevor introduced her as his new executive assistant at a company dinner. 24 years old, blonde hair, big blue eyes, and a personality like a cheerleader on caffeine. She laughed at everything Trevor said, touched his arm when she talked to him, and called him by his first name, like they were old friends. What struck me most was how Diane treated her. My mother-in-law, who barely tolerated me, was warm and welcoming to this girl. They hugged. They chatted like they'd known each other for years. Something in my gut twisted, but when I mentioned it to Trevor that night, he exploded. Said I was being insecure and paranoid. Said I was so focused on my own company that I was imagining problems in our marriage. He flipped it all on me, made me feel like I was the problem. But I wasn't crazy. I knew something was wrong, so I started paying attention. I noticed the way Brittany dressed when she knew Trevor would be in the office. I noticed how his phone was always face down now. I noticed the new cologne, the extra care with his appearance, the way he pulled away when I tried to touch him. Then I found the receipt, $47,000 at Cartier. I'd never received any jewelry from Cartier. I'd never even been inside that store with Trevor. That's when I hired a private investigator. I gave him 2 weeks and a budget. What he brought back made me physically sick. Photos of Trevor and Brittany at intimate restaurants. Photos of them going into a downtown penthouse together. Photos of them on a weekend trip to Napa Valley, while Trevor told me he was at a manufacturing conference. The investigator dug deeper and found that Trevor was paying rent on that penthouse, $15,000 a month, and it was in Brittany's name. He was funding her entire lifestyle with money from the business, my money. The money I'd invested to save his family's legacy was paying for his mistress to live like a queen. I sat with those photos for 3 days, trying to figure out my next move. And then came the day that changed everything. I was driving through downtown, running errands, trying to keep my mind off the disaster my marriage had become. And I drove past a luxury car dealership. Not just any dealership, but the kind where they sell Rolls-Royces and Bentleys and cars that cost more than most people's houses. And there, right in the showroom window, I saw my husband with Brittany and a salesman bringing paperwork to a brand new Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight blue, gleaming under those showroom lights like a piece of jewelry. I pulled into the parking lot and sat there, watching. Brittany was jumping up and down like a child on Christmas morning. Trevor was signing papers, that same charming smile on his face that he'd used to win me over. And then I saw him hand her the keys, and she screamed and threw her arms around his neck, and he kissed her. Right there in that dealership, he kissed her like she was his wife, like I didn't exist. Something in me went cold, not angry yet, just cold and clear. I got out of my car and walked into that dealership. The salesman saw me first, and his smile faltered because he could probably read my face. Then Brittany saw me, and her mouth made this little O shape. And then Trevor turned around, and I watched all the color drain from his face. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said, "That's an expensive gift, Trevor." My voice was calm, almost pleasant. He stuttered something about it being a business investment, a company car, and Brittany, this child, had the nerve to say, "He said I deserve it." She actually said that to my face. Then I heard heels clicking on the showroom floor behind me, and I knew before I turned around. Diane Whitmore walked in, holding a champagne flute, dressed like she was at a celebration, because that's what this was to them, a celebration. She looked at me and said, "Oh, Angela, don't make a scene." Like I was the one being inappropriate, like I was the one in the wrong. I just stared at her, and she kept talking. She said, "Trevor is a man. Men have needs. You should be grateful he still comes home to you." And then she said the thing that really showed me who she was. She said, "Maybe if you were more woman and less businesswoman, he wouldn't need to look elsewhere." And then she threw her champagne in my face. The cold liquid splashed across my skin, dripped down my hair, stained my white blouse. I could hear Brittany giggling behind me. I could see the salesman looking away, embarrassed. And Trevor, my husband, the man who promised to love and honor me, said absolutely nothing. He just stood there, letting his mother humiliate me, letting his mistress laugh at me. I wiped the champagne from my eyes. I looked at all three of them. Diane smirking, Brittany still giggling, Trevor looking like he wanted to disappear. And I said just 2 words. I said, "Okay. Okay." Then I turned around and walked out of that dealership with whatever dignity I had left. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, champagne drying sticky on my skin, and something clicked in my mind. This wasn't just an affair, this was a plan. Trevor had targeted me from the beginning. That vulnerable act at the charity gala, the sob story about his struggling family business, the way he made me feel special and valued. It was all a con. He'd married me for my money, and Diane had helped him do it. And now they thought they'd won. They thought I was beaten, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. See, I didn't build a multi-million-dollar company by being weak. I built it by being strategic, by being patient, by knowing when to strike. And right then, sitting in that parking lot, smelling like cheap champagne and humiliation, I decided it was time to strike. I drove home and made 4 phone calls. First, I called Nicole, my lawyer. We'd known each other since college, and she was brilliant and ruthless, and exactly who I needed. Second, I called my accountant and told him I needed a complete audit of Whitmore Industries and every dollar I'd invested. Third, I called my business partner and told him to prepare for some changes. And fourth, I called that private investigator back and told him to dig deeper. I needed to know everything about Trevor, about his past relationships, about his mother, about every lie they'd ever told. What they uncovered over the next 2 weeks was devastating. Trevor's struggling family business. It was already bankrupt when we met. He had nothing. The manufacturing plant was shut down. Equipment sold off. Debts piled high. My $5 million didn't go into expansion or modernization. It went into their lifestyle. It paid for Diane's gambling debts that I never knew about. It paid for that penthouse for Brittany. It paid for vacations and cars and jewelry for other women. Because Brittany wasn't even his only affair. There were 3 others over the past year. But here's what they didn't count on. When I invested in Whitmore Industries, Trevor's lawyer drew up the partnership agreement. It was a friend of his, someone who did him a favor, someone who wasn't very good at their job. And in that agreement, because the business had no real assets, and I was providing all the capital, I owned 70% of the company. Trevor had put up the company itself as collateral for my investment. He probably never read the fine print. He probably thought he'd just drain my money, and I'd never fight back. And our prenup, I'd insisted on one, even though Trevor acted hurt that I wanted it. My lawyer wrote it, and it was ironclad. It had a clause that said, if either party committed adultery, they forfeited all rights to marital assets. Trevor signed it without reading it carefully because he thought he was playing me. He thought he'd take my money and I'd be too heartbroken or too embarrassed to fight back. For 3 weeks, I played the perfect defeated wife at home. I moped around, seemed depressed, barely talked. Trevor and Diane thought they'd broken me. Trevor started getting sloppy, charging more personal expenses to the company, making bigger withdrawals. He was so confident that I wouldn't do anything that he just kept stealing from his own business, not realizing that business was legally mine. Every purchase, every withdrawal, every expense was more evidence of embezzlement and fraud. Then I planned the final move. I invited everyone to dinner at Diane's house, told them I wanted to talk about our marriage, about making things work, about being a better wife. Trevor jumped at it. He thought I was surrendering. I could see it in his eyes, that arrogant confidence that he'd won. Diane was thrilled, already planning how to manage me now that I was broken. And Trevor brought Brittany, actually brought his mistress to a family dinner because he was that confident, that disrespectful. We were all sitting in Diane's dining room. These people who'd humiliated me, stolen from me, laughed at me. And then Nicole walked in, with 3 process servers behind her. I'll never forget the look on their faces when those papers were handed to them. Trevor got divorce papers, citing adultery, with the prenup clause highlighted. He also got papers showing I was seizing control of Whitmore Industries, based on the partnership agreement, and filing criminal charges for embezzlement. Diane got served with a lawsuit for knowingly assisting in the embezzlement of my investment funds. And Brittany got a restraining order banning her from company property and a notice that she was being investigated for accepting stolen goods. The room exploded. Trevor was shaking, reading the papers over and over like they'd change if he looked hard enough. Diane started screaming, calling me every name in the book, saying I was an ungrateful woman who didn't know my place. And Brittany, that poor stupid girl, turned to Trevor and said, "You told me you were rich. You said we'd travel the world." And Trevor, my husband who'd been so charming and smooth, turned on her and yelled, "Shut up. This is all your fault for being so obvious." They turned on each other like rats on a sinking ship. Diane blamed Trevor for being careless. Trevor blamed Brittany for being too demanding. Brittany cried and said she didn't know the money was stolen. It was pathetic and beautiful at the same time. And through it all, I just sat there, silent, watching them destroy each other. Finally, when they stopped screaming long enough to notice me, I spoke. I said, "You threw champagne in my face. You laughed at me. You thought I was weak because I didn't fight back right away. But I wasn't weak. I was strategic. That Rolls Royce you bought, it was repossessed this morning, purchased with embezzled funds. This house, Diane, I'm seizing it. Trevor put it up as collateral for the business. Everything you thought you had, it's gone. And it's gone because you underestimated the quiet black woman. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought my patience was stupidity. You thought my grace was surrender. But I was just building my case, documenting everything, waiting for the right moment to take it all back. Then I stood up, looked at each of them one last time, and walked out of that house. I never saw them again. 6 months later, my life looks completely different. Trevor is bankrupt, living in a studio apartment, working a retail job, because nobody will hire him after the fraud charges. Diane lost her home, moved in with her sister in another state, and from what I hear, Trevor won't even take her calls. She destroyed her relationship with her son for nothing. And Brittany, she disappeared the second the money dried up. Last I heard, she's engaged to some other successful man, probably running the same game. As for me, I sold Whitmore Industries to a competitor for $12 million, made a $7 million profit on my $5 million investment. I've expanded my own company, hired new people, and I'm thriving. I'm surrounded by real friends, real family, people who loved me before the money and will love me after. I sleep peacefully at night, knowing I stood up for myself, knowing I didn't let them get away with it. Because here's what I learned through all of this. Being underestimated is actually your biggest advantage. When people think you're weak, they get careless. They show you who they really are. They give you all the ammunition you need to take them down. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. My patience wasn't stupidity. It was preparation. And my grace? It wasn't surrender. It was power. They thought they could take everything from me because I was a black woman who they saw as an easy mark. They thought I'd be too ashamed to fight back, too scared of being alone, too desperate to keep up appearances. But they didn't know that I'd already been through fire to build my success. They didn't know that I'd been underestimated my entire life and had learned to use it as fuel. They didn't know that quiet doesn't mean weak and humble doesn't mean stupid. So to everyone watching this, everyone who's ever been disrespected or counted out or laughed at, I want you to remember something. The person who underestimates you has already lost. They just don't know it yet. Your job isn't to prove yourself in the moment. Your job is to be strategic, to be patient, to build your case, and to strike when they least expect it. Because revenge isn't loud. Revenge is quiet and calculated and absolutely devastating. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to be strategic in your silence, drop a comment below telling me how you stood up for yourself. Hit that like button if you believe in taking back your power. And subscribe because I've got more stories about women who refuse to stay down. Remember, being underestimated is your superpower. Use it wisely. I'll see you in the next one.